So today we are going to learn about how to create multiple choice tests that actually work using the instructional traction with selected response items chapter in Chapuis. And I call this presentation Beyond the Boring because most of the time multiple choice tests or quizzes are pretty boring. We all remember doing those in our schooling experience and it wasn't really that fun. And a lot of the times we would just guess. Sometimes we would guess right, sometimes we would guess wrong. Most of the time it was just a check and guess kind of thing. So this is to prevent that from happening, because if a student guesses, that's not really a great indicator of whether they know it or not. So we need to make sure that multiple choice tests and quizzes are actually useful in helping students and helping teachers. So to start off, I just want to introduce or reintroduce this topic of closing the gap, because this is so important. I think this feedback loop here is really the key to understanding this idea. Starting with initial instruction, going to student action, teacher and student analysis, then this is the key part, having additional instruction and or experience, student revision based on feedback, then going back to teacher and student analysis, and finally to the summative assessment. So this is the part that we're going to be focusing on in creating distractors and other tools to then lead to this summative assessment, which could be a multiple choice test or other quiz. Overall, our main goal is to use these assessment processes and instruments that have enough instructional traction to identify the specific learning needs, because we all know that students have a lot of needs that need to be addressed. We can't just go on, and it goes into differentiation as well. So what is instructional traction anyway? Well, assessments that yield solid diagnostic information are considered instructionally tractable when its results provide evidence that points to specific learning needs. So what does that mean? Well, essentially, if a diagnostic test, like a multiple choice test, is able to provide the teacher with information that is actually useful for them, they can use it in the future, going back to that feedback loop, then it's considered instructionally tractable. Main goal here is students should not get the answer right for the wrong reason, and wrong answer choices should give insight into student understanding. These are called distractors. So as you can see in the box, multiple choice distractors should all be plausible choices, each reflecting a misunderstanding or partial understanding of the learning target the item is intended to measure. So let's learn a little bit more about how to create these distractors. So we all know the typical multiple choice answers of A, B, and C, right? Or maybe A, B, C, and D. Well, what we have to decide as teachers, as future teachers, is how we can use these wrong answer choices, maybe A is the right one, to actually lead to student understanding and help us see where students are getting wrong, where students are going in the wrong direction or down the wrong path. Rodriguez and Haladina say that only using 3 is actually a lot more useful than using, say, 4 or 5, because it's the quality that counts more than the quantity. Because each wrong answer should represent a wrong path in reasoning or conceptual understanding, because we want students to not select the right answer for the wrong reason. In addition, these are some qualities of useful distractors. Distractors being the wrong answer choices that help us see how to guide instruction. So if you have a straightforward knowledge target, distractors should also be straightforward, plausible, and of course incorrect. So how do we go about doing this? Well, we can look at students' wrong answers on, say, an open response question or a short answer, and see what are the typical errors that they're making. And then we can use the ones that appear most frequently as our blueprint. And when we look at this blueprint, we can see that it's pretty clear in reasoning proficiencies as well. So, for example, kind of the same steps. We examine the wrong answers of our class after giving an open response question. We find this distractor formula or blueprint, basically labeling each error into a category. And then we write a description of the distractor formula. So a real world example, this is from the book. I want to create a multiple choice test that tests students on their ability to make generalizations. That's my learning target for this lesson. So during or after instruction, maybe it's an exit slip, you're going to ask an open-ended question. What generalizations can you make from this passage about how meat-eating plants lure their prey? Just finished a science lesson on meat-eating plants, or you read a short article about it. So you're going to examine student responses and then look at what categories do they fall under. Some are going to be correct, they stay true to the evidence, and they also generalize to a wider array of instances. Some will overgeneralize. Some will have no generalization present, and others might have an incorrect interpretation of the evidence. So there's these 4 choices here. Then you can use these to create the distractors for a multiple choice test. So let's look at what this would look like in our future classrooms or practicums. Well, you would first determine the learning target. So like, what do you or your CT want your students to learn? Create an open-ended question, or have your CT do this for your exit slip. Analyze student responses, or you could even ask your CT for student responses. And then maybe you could create a multiple choice test or some kind of formative assessment that considers these responses and repurposes them into distractors, so you can actually tell if students have mastered the material or not, which is the ultimate goal of this lesson. So in conclusion, I just want you guys to understand that multiple choice tests do not have to be boring. They can really be useful. In addition, you can use distractors in your classroom to actually add to the learning experience, because when students realize that this is the wrong answer, and when they self-assess on those wrong answers, as well as the teacher, you self-assessing on your creation of those wrong answers, you can really create a solid learning environment so that you can create learning and that students can create their own learning.